where today we will be discussing about the third wave of COVID-19 pandemic and how vaccination can one of be a possible armors in dealing with it. We feel privileged to be hosting this show in collaboration with Policy Center and Gender Lab Miranda House, University of Delhi. Policy Center and Gender Lab provides research opportunities in the field of social sciences, policy shape up, and research studies. So today we have with us Professor Rajesh Malhotra, Chief of COVID Trauma Center, AIMS. We also have with us the founder and the editor-in-chief of Her World India, Ms. Rakhi Bakshi. Her World India is a brainchild of Ms. Bakshi. During the session, I request all the attendees to keep themselves on mute, and if you have any questions, you are requested to put them in the chat box. All the questions will be entertained at the end of the session. So without much ado, I request Rakhi ma'am to commence the session. Over to you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that gracious introduction, as you always do, Chandrika. Thank you so much. And I'm so truly delighted on behalf of Her World India and me, Rakhi Bakshi. I welcome you, Professor Rajesh Malhotra. You are taking care of a very, very important assignment at a very prestigious and big hospital, which is AIMS. And I can only thank you for sharing your time with us at this very critical time that we are talking each day to a whole lot of experts, voices related to COVID-19, as we are now in second wave of COVID. We are looking at third wave, and that's why we thought it's only pertinent that today we talk to you. We also are very happy to say that Policy Center and Gender Lab is with us, and they always share their own insights and support to us. So to you, Professor Sharma Malhotra again, that, do you think the second wave is now waning? Do you think as reports are coming in, the cases are coming down? And do you think now we're inching towards third wave?
Good noon, Rakhi. I want to thank you for giving this opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's always, a privilege to be able to talk to people, clarify their doubts, and clear the air around the myths and the wrong narratives. So, about your question now, I think yes, the second wave is showing signs of abating, though we should be a little wary. It is still too early to let our guard down, and this was actually expected, because of many reasons. One, because the lockdowns which were imposed, and we have been telling people, requesting them to break this chain of transmission by avoiding the public gatherings and not to throw caution to the winds. So one is the lockdown, which was, of course, going to take time. So if you clamp a lockdown today, for the next 2 weeks or so, you'll continue to have patients who are already infected. It's only at the end of second week you will start seeing the numbers really going down. The second thing which has been seen, and there's a lot to learn from the countries which are ahead of us, that sharper the rise in a wave, in a surge, equally sharp is the descent. It doesn't happen. So you see, the thing is, we are a huge lot of vulnerable population, right? And people who get infected or who get vaccinated are the ones who are protected. So if we have been talking about sort of flattening the curve, we right from the beginning we say that, okay, when we are getting the cases, let's flatten the curve. What does flatten the curve mean? Flatten the curve means that make sure that the less people are infected. So it doesn't rise as much as a surge or a wave, but then it plateaus. But that plateaus goes on for a very long time, because there's a huge number of people who are susceptible, and they keep on gradually getting infected. So it doesn't go up like a wave, it doesn't come down like a wave, but you have a certain number of patients who are going on getting infected, and that is more or less like a plateau. Once you have a huge wave like this, it is catastrophic, but then I think it is also likely that it comes down with the same gradient with which it had gone up. So another reason why I would think that we are on the descent.
Professor Malhotra, another question that I must ask you is that what's also happening, since you are taking care of COVID, especially and the COVID patients, what is at this stage happening? I mean, today we read an article which said that, other diseases and patients who are suffering from other diseases. So what is the ratio like? They are not being maybe attended so properly. Is it the case? And how many people would you say ratio-wise are getting recovered from COVID, but actually dying from second level of infections?
So, CC, you mentioned the article which appeared today, which said that almost 50% of the people who are getting secondary infections are dying. Now, this question which you have asked is a very complex question. It's got multiple parts. So, part A, who are the patients who are non-COVID and are dying or suffering? We'll never know, because we have realized after the first wave ebbed, we saw a huge rush of patients who would have otherwise sought medical attention. For example, somebody fell in the house in the bathroom and broke a hip. Normally, such a patient would have immediately come to the hospital, and they came to the hospital after 2 months or 3 months. I'm sure, I'm an orthopedic surgeon, but I'm sure the cardiologist saw the similar kind of thing, that somebody who needed urgent attention for the cardiac condition and all. It is very difficult to estimate that in a condition, in a country like ours, which is, the various groups of people, the rural, urban, and all. About those who are dying of secondary infection, let me clarify one thing very clearly. One, more severe the disease you have, the more likely is the chance that you would be given steroids for a very long time. That's number one. That's one risk factor. Number two, it's much more likely that you will be hospitalized for a very long time. And number three, very likely that you will be on some kind of oxygen support for a very long time. And even before COVID, we have known that the patients who are on ventilator for a very long time, they get what is called VAP, ventilator associated pneumonia. And that's a killer. Similarly, we have known before all this hype about black fungus, yellow fungus, white fungus, we have known before COVID also that the patients who are on ventilator for a very long time, or who are in ICUs and who have their immunity seriously compromised, they get fungal infections in their lungs. Now, these
Okay.
fungal infection in the lung can be Candida, which is the white fungus, or they can be Aspergillus, which can be white or yellow fungus. Fortunately, not so much the black fungus, but the other fungus. In a way, all fungus infections are alike, because these fungi are everywhere, right? They cannot affect a normal person with a normal immunity. When somebody is hospitalized for a very long time, his immunity is down, he's getting a lot of antibiotics or antifungal infection medicines to prevent. That is the time these fungal infections catch them. Now, whether it is a bacterial infection or a fungal infection, any infection which is occurring in the hospital is by the bugs which have survived, strong antibiotics.
So, Professor Malhotra, did it also mean that, as a unit, you needed more infrastructure support, you needed more staff, you needed more hands, and you needed more coordination, you needed to really work real time? What have been the experiences, sir?
This has been true about every center in the country which has been looking after, because you see, it's a pandemic. So in a pandemic, the first thing which happens is that your health infrastructure is stretched to an extent like never before. Who in our lives has really seen this kind of strain on the healthcare resources, where not only you have a huge deluge of patients, but the fact that the healthcare providers are also getting infected. Your nurses, your
Yeah.
doctors are also getting infected. So there is a ongoing depletion, mostly temporarily, but then we have lost a lot of healthcare workers. But there is been a big challenge with, and second thing is, let's face the fact, in India, the healthcare is provided on the shoulders of attendants. Even if you have, in the best of the hospitals, the attendants like to be next to the patient, and many setups will trust the attendants to be around the patient, to call the doctor that, if there's any problem, or even if you can ring a bell. This is one unique illness where there can be no attendant with you. And that is the biggest strain on the healthcare system, number one. Number two is you can put in only as many hours. If this was not such an infectious disease, we could have been working 12 hours, 24 hours in the ward.
I know.
But
In
still
fact,
it is-
we must pay a lot of respect to all those doctors like you, health workers, and all kinds of layers of medical staff who've been working day and night, and we cannot thank enough So many of you have, your colleagues have lost lives, and we can only show our own, sympathy or empathy towards this whole thing. But coming to other things, you talked about this breaking of chain. We are talking about COVID protocol behaviors because, we are hearing cases where people got vaccinated but still got infection. So we are trying to understand each day. I think each day is new learning for all of us, even for you. But some key learnings that you would like to also share here as we are talking about now the third wave.
So, talking about third wave, first wave, second wave, talking about chain of transmission, interrupting it, everything revolves around one basic fact that it's a human to human transmission now, and only an infected person can infect another person. Right. So, whatever the mode of transmission, if we interrupt this transmission of infection from one person to other, the pandemic will be over. And that is required only for 2 weeks, isn't it? I mean, once everybody who's infected infects zero person or does not infect another person and can keep it that way for 2 weeks, the pandemic will be over. The virus will die its own death. There'll be nowhere to go. So that is where the importance of interrupting the transmission lies. Now, how can we interrupt this transmission? So first thing is, if you do not allow the infection to go from one person to other by a barrier, that barrier could be a mask, it could be distance, it could be observing hand sanitization. We knew that for influenza, for example, the most common mode of transmission of flu was a handshake, because you would shake hand with a person who was sneezing, his hands were contaminated, and this was pre-COVID, we knew this. And you shake hand with another person and he touches his mouth or his nose and then he gets infected with flu. So that is the same thing here. All respiratory viruses will some way or other will get transmitted through these mechanisms, either droplet or aerosol, that sort of thing, or fomite. So that is the second thing. And that's where the importance of hand sanitization comes in, because even if you catch a virus on your hands, you sanitize it so that if you touch your face or your nose, or in the present day, they touch the outside of your mask, people touch
Yeah.
the outside of their mask and they don't realize. I have seen people wear gloves.
These are very, very critical, I think, and very, very simple, but very critical inputs that you're sharing. And thank you to you for sharing this. But now I come to a very important point that we are discussing right now. It's all over. It's about vaccination. At this time, when I'm talking to you, you know that so much is going on, what India is talking globally, how much is available, how much confusion, how much people are panicked. Somebody has got one dose, waiting for the other dose. Some states are saying we don't have much. The center is saying, we are talking. So what is actually happening? Could you tell us where are we? And do you think that we are a little late maybe in looking at things?
See, the problem with the availability of vaccine or the crunch has been something which has been faced by the entire world. And that's why we took the right approach. Let's talk about, it's very, a lot of people can criticize what is happening, but let me explain to you how things work. Suppose we call it triage. I run a trauma center. And if you have a mass casualty where 100 patients come in, what do? You first, see you triage them and see who is very mildly injured. You leave him alone. You don't do anything because he's not going to die if you didn't do anything. There's a very severely injured person, so that the mildly injured is triaged as green. Nothing will happen to him. So these patients very often get upset. They shout because they need a few stitches and they think the doctor is not paying them attention to stitch their wounds and all. But the doctor knows they are not going to die. The second group is the red. They are going to die. There's a very high possibility that they'll die. And even if we try to save them, it will need 8 or 10 people work together vigorously on that person who may or may not survive. But there's a huge chunk which is called yellow. They are the people who will survive if they got timely attention, but they will die if we didn't do anything. And that's when you have a limitation of resources, you concentrate your resources and energies on saving those whom, if you paid attention, they'll survive, unlike red. Or if you didn't do anything, they will die. So that is the approach we have to take whenever there is a resources crunch. right? Now, with this thing being clear, you
Do
have
you,
to
do
now
you think,
decide.
do you think, sir, it's easier? I mean, of course, you're an expert and a doctor for so many years looking at things, but do you think to tell people, especially in a country like India, of varied kinds and cultures and understanding, it is also a huge challenge to
It,
put everyone together.
it is, but then, this is what happened in Italy. This has happened in UK when they had a huge number of patients in the hospital. They did not put ventilators on 85 or 90-year-old. They put it on 40 years old, 45-year-old people who they wanted that, if I have one, whether I'll put it on 80-year-old or a 40-year-old. Those are very ethical questions, but you come onto the ground level, you will realize how important it is. Now, coming back to the vaccine, there are always ethical dilemmas of two types. One, should we vaccinate those first who are most likely to die if we don't vaccinate them? Or we vaccinate those who are younger, they will not die if we did not vaccinate them, but they are super spreaders. This is what happens in USA. In USA, they said that the young people started partying hard very early. They started going around and they were spreading the disease around.
Yeah.
Now, we have two options. Either we keep the sick and the old who are very likely to die if they get infection and who are, like sort of contributing to more than 60% of the deaths, more than 60 years of age. So whether do we protect them by vaccination or we protect younger people who are contributing very small to the deaths? At least, and second thing is, this is what was the picture in the first wave also. Very few young people were getting involved or getting very seriously sick. So this is an ethical question which had to be resolved. So I think the WHO guidelines and the government of India, whatever they did was to vaccinate those who are much more likely to die for the want of vaccination if they got infected than those who would not land up in ICU and would not die if they were not given vaccination.
Okay,
So that is the whole thing.
yeah, I agree. A hospital like AIIMS with such a big scale volume and this deep research orientation, having been there at the forefront, sir, what have been some of the critical, let's say, eyewitness experiences in terms of handling COVID patients? The kind of pattern that you saw. I mean, your first person kind of observation coming from you.
So the pattern has been variable between the first wave and the second wave. We all know that the numbers were in the second wave was sheer nerve-wracking. But what was also seen was that we had many more younger people, and many more sicker people. In the first wave, the people were not so sick. So we were kept on wondering whether it could be a combination of factors which led to far more people landing in ICUs in the second wave than first. One, the sheer numbers. So if you say that 5% patients will need ICU care, for example. So if you have 1,000 people, it's only 50, and if you have 1 lakh people, then it's 5,000, right? So that's the sheer number. So that will always happen when you have huge load. Even a small percentages will translate into a huge number. That's number one. Number two is whether the variant itself, which was possibly causing a lot of people, because we saw a few things very clearly. One, that the symptoms were different in the second wave as compared to the first wave. The people were coming with different kinds. There were far more gastroenteritis or abdominal complaints. There were running nose, which in the first wave we were saying a running nose is not a feature of COVID. If you have a running wave, don't get upset. It's much more likely to be flu than to be COVID. Then similarly, the redness of the eyes, similarly, the other symptoms. So that was, so whether this was giving rise to more lung involvement by the, by alteration of its attachment sites to the different receptors, as we know. And third thing is that, the people getting worse while they were still at home and they were getting some treatment. On the whole, it made it the biggest challenge was dealing with such a huge number of seriously sick patients, which
No.
was a distinct thing from the first wave. In the first
That's
wave,
exactly what the sheer number and volume, and I'm sure the way you all have handled day and night, I think much said the less. The third wave now, how are we preparing? I mean, we are hearing, but as experts, now committees are now at this stage, and I must say that maybe certain things should have been done earlier, but now people are coordinating, understanding, coming together, chain of different kind of sectors coming together, whether they are from a science background or communities or administration. So at this stage, how are we preparing for third wave? What are the things that we should be really learning, working on?
So let's start from the very basics. After the first wave, everybody thought that, in India, possibly will not have a second wave. So the public, even when everybody kept on requesting them, appealing to them to follow COVID appropriate behavior, I think the common man was somehow not listening. So I think now with this harsh second wave, I think all of us have now understood that we can't take this virus for granted. So I think we will have possibly a much more disciplined and much more compliant behavior from our countrymen this time than we had between the first and the second wave. So I think that's one thing which is mentally preparing people. That's number one. Number two is, we almost converted, apart from the last time we had a few wards in the AIIMS, main AIIMS, and a big COVID hospital in trauma center, and a huge cancer hospital in Jhajjar converted into a COVID hospital. This time we opened private wards, converted them into COVID wards. We opened, this time there were 3 floors in the main hospital, which were converted to COVID wards. We created more operation theaters. Earlier, most of the operations in confirmed COVID patients were going on in the trauma center where deliveries were being conducted, surgeries were being performed. So now we have realized the scalability of our services, that if required, the entire AIIMS can be converted to a COVID hospital. We have done that in almost every corner of the hospital once, and I'm sure the similar experience is with every healthcare organization, that we have seen the scalability. We have now actually seen, I don't think that we'll ever have so many such
Okay.
seriously sick patients. So I
Okay,
think we
one
have.
thing we must ask from here, from Herbal India especially, is about women's health and how COVID actually impacted more women. Would you like to throw more light on that? That how women patients behaved or faced the crisis, or how you as experts looked at that?
So many things in that respect. One is that, generally, genetically, women are somewhat protected against COVID. So the number of COVID patients has been lesser. It's almost 40, 60. The deaths among women have been fewer. Again, almost 1/3 deaths are among women. I think what it has hit them hard is mainly women who were pregnant, and that is the group which we have seen in a large number, because we were able to provide the facilities for delivery, the facilities for cesarean sections in the trauma center, the facilities for taking care of the newborn, because they were all ethical questions, test the newborn whether positive, negative, to keep with the mother or not. But our pediatricians, to their wisdom, and rightly so, decided that keep the baby with the mother, because that is, I think, physiologically also good for the mother. The only disadvantage, not only, a major disadvantage with women has been the inability to decide whether the pregnant women or the lactating women should be given vaccine or not. Now, I think there are several factors in that. One is that all women belong to the younger age group, possibly even lesser than 45-year age, who were pregnant, with a few exceptions. So they, again, it was believed that they are somewhat protected. The children, except for those less than 1 year old, have not shown very serious disease, and the incidence of very serious disease among them has been very, very low. And then the question mark about vaccination. Now, with more experience, it's not just about vaccination, but which vaccination, because you have to do trials on every special group to decide whether you are going to give vaccination to this group or not.
Okay.
And now the recommendations are coming even without major trials on this, because whenever you don't have enough data, you decide the risk benefit ratio, whether it will be safer for a pregnant lady to get COVID, or it will be safer to give her vaccine and prevent her from COVID. So
What
you
would
have
be
to
your
weigh the risk.
critical input here, sir? As you said, the risk factor is there. So what would be your critical benefit, if you could tell, for the benefit of viewers?
We, like I said, that the pregnant women, a very small percentage has shown very severe disease, although among women, they are the high risk group. So if you are not a woman who shares the other risk factors, like if you are old, if you have had a kidney transplant, if you have got diabetes, if you got obesity, if you got high blood pressure, heart disease,
Yeah, yeah.
are at a high risk. But a young lady, is at somewhat higher risk than her contemporaries if she is pregnant.
Okay.
But still, it's not a huge number of, deaths or ICU admissions occurring in these groups. That is why the vaccination groups have been a little wary of, giving them vaccine where we don't know what the long-term effects on the women and the child are. But now, some of the particular vaccines have been given to some pregnant women in the Western world. They have also shown if the mother is vaccinated, some antibodies could be found in the milk of the mother, which get passed on to the child. But by and large, the children are not seriously at risk of death or serious illness and ICU, and that's what decides these decisions.
I think that parts need to be understood and highlighted, because there are a lot of theories coming about children's health. In fact, people are saying that how in third wave they would be really greatly impacted. So I'm sure the studies are being made and being understood as to what kind of age groups are vulnerable.
So I think you are right there, but let me explain to you, I think, to my opinion, where this genesis of third wave affecting children is coming from. It is not some prediction or a foresight or a astrological prediction. See, once we immunize the old, above 60, and we immunize the 45 to 60 with comorbidities, the virus needs to find a prey. And that in a way is a testimony to the effectiveness of vaccination, that the second wave affected the young people more, because they were unprotected. Now we have opened up vaccination for adults. So that is why if
Okay.
the virus has to attack, who is still unprotected? So that's where the prediction comes that, maybe the next time unprotected population is the pediatric population. So maybe it
That is
will
the
affect
correct
them
study.
more. But going by the current trends, these children in the first two waves have not had a very severe illness requiring ICU admission and ventilator and high risk of death. So unless to our bad fortune, the virus mutates and assumes a form which is no way to predict. And I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I'm saying that that's an unlikely possibility, perhaps. But unless it changes itself so that it affects now only children and causes very severe disease in them,
Okay.
children do have so many infections, and they survive
So
all those infections.
let me now ask some of you who want to ask questions. Anyone here? Sometimes they say that, since you ask all the questions, we don't know what to ask. But I think on that behalf, one of the questions I really want to also ask here is that, so, this whole hospital management aspect, of course, right now we're not witnessing, but let's say 20 days back, we were looking at SOS appeals. This much is not there. Oxygen, of course, was not available in full scale. Then the medicine, some of which really sounded very high priced and things like that. So the whole, look at hospitals, how they were equipped and how they also coordinated with the overall health system. What would you say, sir?
So I think everybody tried to do their best, but then if the sheer load of, it happens, let me give you an example. A big gap between the demand and supply becomes a problem in this country. In fact, I can tell you, not to deal with a serious issue in a lighter vein, but I always used to object that you go to Connaught Place to have dinner with your family, you pay through your nose how much you pay, and you are made to wait outside for 2 hours before you can get a table. I'm giving an example because again, there's a huge gap between the demand and supply. If there is a large number of patients which overwhelms it has overwhelmed the Western world. I mean, where the healthcare facilities are so much better. You can't compare a US health system with our health system, given the how much they invest in it and how rigorous their healthcare deliveries are, how expensive their healthcare delivery are, how huge economic burden and illness causes there, something which can be so easily and in a very cheap manner can be treated in India, costs you a huge fortune to get treated in US or in a developed world. So in spite of that, the systems just broke down because it's sheer numbers. So that is why I think unless we can reduce the number of cases, unless we get brought right where it begins, it becomes, if it gets out of hand, it snowballs into such a huge catastrophe that no healthcare system in the world can handle. Look at our population. If the entire population gets infected and 5% need hospitalization, you are looking at, almost close to 6 crore just by 5%.
Sure, sir. Looking at the virus, of course, a lot of people are every day, I'm sure, studying the experts, but and whatever name it is being given or not. But is there any slight understanding as to where it is, what it is, where it is going? Because we were really taken by surprise and said we don't understand the nature. It's really changing its whole pattern very quickly.
Yeah. So one is that the virus is an RNA virus, so they keep on changing, and that's not that they can help it. It's just that their proofreading is not good. So when they are making copies, nobody's checking whether the copies which is being made is the same or it's a little different. So many of these copies are not compatible with their survival. So when that kind of mutation occurs, the virus dies. There are other mutations which can make it, less lethal, more lethal. Usually what is expected, when it becomes highly transmissible, that means it starts catching you more easily. Generally they become less lethal, because it's actually counterintuitive. If a virus kills everybody, then how will it survive? If it is lethal and highly infectious and everybody it infects dies, so the human race is eliminated, the virus is also eliminated. So that doesn't happen in nature. So what happens is gradually they become endemic. Endemic means they get, it's like measles. It's not eradicated from India. It's there. We vaccinated. Some people will still get it. So it becomes endemic. When it becomes endemic, it means it involves a certain small number of people in the population. It is not as lethal as it used to be. It doesn't kill at that rate. And then, you start vaccinating children when they are born, like you vaccinate them against measles and against TB. You vaccinate them against the COVID virus also when they are born. And that is the future. When it becomes endemic, we keep on getting some cases, and that's it.
So one or two very brief questions. Today, again, another report which said that some villages in a state really got too many patients, and maybe not many were looking at that. So are we not really looking properly at some of these very, very remote areas, the villages and the people?
Yeah, but then again, if you refer to what I told you a short while ago, it will keep on looking for the susceptible population. So if the rural people, and let me also tell you that there has been more vaccine hesitancy in the rural areas as compared to the urban areas because of the more myths and less level of education. Sometimes the lot of rural areas, there are villages together which refuse to get vaccinated because they thought that it will bring a harm to them. But then you are right. This is a huge population, a huge segment of our population. And I think, again, we have to make sure that the healthcare penetrates deepest into the remote corners of our country. The vaccination is done on priority. And if they fall sick, the healthcare should be available to them at the same standards or the same care as for anybody in the urban area.
Okay, so any tip finally, because we keep saying each time of call that protocols should and must be followed, which is about wearing mask, the double mask in fact now, the social distancing and proper sanitization. Some people would still say, oh, why masks are so critical, or why mask is so important, and many of them in fact in some areas we see are reluctant. So the whole importance of masking, what would you say, Professor?
So they have to understand that these are the routes to emit the virus, and these are the routes which give entry to the virus. So you have to stop it from getting into the environment, and you have to stop it from getting from environment into your body. And mask is the most effective way. And about the protection, the most important thing to remember in pandemic is nobody is safe till everybody is safe. So you if you don't observe this, not only you are putting your own life at risk, but you are putting everybody else's who's around you life is also at risk. That's
Okay,
what they
I
have
think
to
that's
understand.
also a social message that each time on Herbal India we want experts like you to spread, so that they get inspired by your words and they take you more seriously and listen to you. And that is our appeal also from Herbal India, that please maintain those COVID protocols. And thank you so much, Professor Malhotra. We really took your time, but I'm sure each time that we would look for more inputs, guidance, we'll of course come back to you. But thank you, and more power to you and your team, who's really working day and night for all of us to make us safer and make us, have a healthier life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and please keep on doing the good work. And I hope that your viewership keeps on increasing and your message goes deeper into the population, and more people listen to you, because that way you act as extension of the healthcare providers. Getting the right message about vaccine, about prevention, everything is something which actually reduces our burden. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was a very enlightening session, and I'm sure a lot of people who are going to watch it also on YouTube will really benefit from it. Thank you so very much for all the insights and all the critical inputs. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Bye bye.